This thing comes in a flat rate box, which means it's way more economical to ship. And what is this thing? This is an anvil. Very nicely packed. This is the 66-pound Alec anvil from Atlas Knife and Tool. And they asked if I'd be willing to take a look at this and give you my thoughts on this anvil. So this video is being sponsored by Atlas Knife and Tool, and they did provide the anvil at no charge. This is a real stout, blocky little anvil, so the mass is really concentrated, and there's not a cantilevered horn or tail that isn't very well supported. It's all real close to the body of the anvil, so it should be a good solid little anvil. From the tip of the horn to the tail, it's 11.5 inches. It's about 4 1/8 inches wide across the face, and the face is 7.5 inches long, and the hardy hole looks like it's 1 inch. So this has a lot going for it compared to some of the other smaller budget-friendly anvils we looked at. A 1-inch hardy hole is a much better size. You'll actually be able to buy hardy tools from most of the suppliers that'll fit a 1-inch hardy hole. Now, an added feature that makes these anvils really unusual is that they include a little bit of a swedge block. If you don't mount this solidly to a stump, you can turn it on its side. There's an octagonal swedge, a 90-degree V-swedge, and a round swedge. So it's not a big swedge block, but that would be a very useful assortment as long as you're willing to leave your anvil not mounted or mounted in a way that you can easily remove it and flip it over. The horn is short, but for most things you really don't need a super long horn. That gives you some room you can draw out. You can make some controlled bends. One area of the face has been heavily relieved for getting clean shoulders that don't have a sharp edge. The rest of it is fairly crisp, although not as sharp as some of those other anvils had. I don't feel like I'm going to cut myself on this, but I'm probably going to go ahead and relieve that a little bit so that it isn't quite that sharp. Same thing with the edges of the hardy hole, they're fairly crisp. Whether you're buying anvils, swedge blocks, hammers, whatever, dressing new tools to suit your needs is pretty common. The height, we didn't discuss that. It looks like it's about 8 inches tall. So I'm going to get this mounted to a block. I've got a block. It's a little bit shorter than what would be ideal for this anvil. I'll probably have to bend over a little bit. But it's going to give us a good test for this anvil as opposed to just setting it up on the platen table. Although you could work with it like this if you wanted to. This anvil does have some cutouts for bolts, so this will be quite easy to mount to a stand. This anvil is made out of cast steel, which should not be confused with cast iron. Cast iron makes a poor anvil. Cast steel, in this case 4140, makes a very good anvil that is then hardened to a Rockwell of between 55 and 59. So that's a good durable anvil, but not so hard that you're likely to chip it. Also has very good rebound. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and ease these edges a little bit. I'm just knocking the sharp corner off. This is probably less than an 1/8 inch radius. I'm going to do the same thing with the hardy hole. If you don't have power tools, you can do all of this with files and sandpaper. It's just going to take a little bit longer. But let's go ahead and try this out. Make a simple bottle opener. That's a good beginner's project on a good beginner's anvil. I'm going to start this with a piece of 1/4 by 1 by about 4 inches long, and I'm going to slot punch a hole in it that will become the ring that makes the opener itself. You always hear people say all you need is a forge hammer and anvil and you can make just about anything. But you're going to also have punches, chisels, things like that. And if you have a forge hammer and anvil, you can make those tools. Although you will need a way to cut steel and hold it for filing, things like that. So a grinder and a vise, assortment of files, hacksaw, things like that are almost necessities. But you don't have to spend a ton of money on those things if you're just getting started. There will always be time to upgrade later. I'm going to use that nice radius to create a shoulder here. The hammer forms one side of the shoulder and the radius on the anvil the other. It takes a little bit of a good aim, but you can do it this way. If you have spring fullers or a guillotine tool of some sort, that's an excellent way to create a shoulder for a project like this. If you need that edge on the other side of the anvil, you can just work around the anvil, or an anvil this small on a portable block would be easy to just spin around if you needed to. So there are advantages to smaller anvils, although any anvil benefits from being more solidly mounted. So a small anvil on a heavy block, solidly mounted to your shop floor, might be better than a slightly larger anvil that jumps and bounces and moves around the shop as you work on it. This is just sitting on the dirt floor, so it's not perfectly level, and it does move around some. So it would be even better if it was bolted down to a concrete floor, or if the post that it's on was sunk 2 or 3 feet into the floor. I'm going to make this kind of a tapered square handle with the small end of the taper up towards the bottle opener. Not much of a taper though, it's going to be almost imperceptible, just enough that you're kind of subconsciously aware of it, even if you aren't consciously aware that it's there. I want to knock the corners down quite heavily. I don't want real crisp corners on here, and it's just an aesthetic decision. Now there's no pritchel hole for punching through on this anvil, but you don't have to have a pritchel hole. You can punch through into the hardy hole, and you can make bolsters for smaller punches if you need to drive smaller punches or you're punching holes in small material, and that will greatly improve things. So a pritchel hole is nice, but absolutely not a requirement on an anvil. And I'm just going to start that circle by drifting through. Then I'm going to go to the horn and draw the circle out over the horn. I like that this horn is a little bit stubby on the end and does not come to a sharp point. It's really easy to bump into the horn of an anvil, and a sharp point can be kind of painful. You'll see a lot of old anvils where people have just taken a hammer and bashed the sharp point in just so it isn't sharp anymore. But this one's nicely blunted and rounded, so it's really very ideal for this. Now once that ring is rounded up, I can tip it over kind of on its corner and go ahead and start putting a bevel on that. This knocks the sharp corner off both inside and outside and just makes for a more pleasant tool in the end. Not absolutely required, but it's a step I always try to put on something like this. With the ring established, I can come back and clean up that handle end and get it the shape I want it. There are so many variables in what you can do with something like a simple bottle opener. You could probably make 100 different styles without ever repeating the exact same element. Now this is hard to hold up. I'm chiseling around the shank, and it's one thing to lay that ring flat on the anvil, but doing the edges is kind of problematic, and you just have to fuss with a little bit. Typically I would do this under the treadle hammer, and that way I could hold on to it with the tongs, hold the tool in my hand, and operate the treadle hammer with my foot, and I don't need to drop the tongs like I'm doing here. But with a little persistence and a little bit of stubbornness, you can get these things done. I'm doing a double chisel line here, and this will just make a nice little element. And I'm actually using a cold chisel, so it's a more pronounced element than it would be with a hot chisel. There's a slightly bigger angle on the cold chisel. A ball nose punch then creates a little tab that actually engages the bottle cap. And this is something you have to do in pretty much every bottle opener, so you've got something that grabs that conveniently. And I'll put my touch mark on the back of it. Now the round opening works just fine for a bottle opener, but I've always liked kind of an oval shaped opening. It's just an aesthetic decision. As long as you can lever off the bottle cap, the exact size and shape of the opening isn't that relevant. Although this circle may have been too big. I think this groove is a little bit choppy from the chisel, so I'm going to go ahead and file it. This is an extra step that you don't really have to do if you're just getting started, if you're new to this kind of stuff. But I find taking the extra time to clean things up with the file can really elevate your work and make it of a higher quality than it is straight off the anvil. I really do feel like files are a required tool for most blacksmith shops. I'm going to use a little bit of a paste wax finish. This is from ZH Fabrication. Lots of alternatives for finishes. I just like the wax finish, and it's very easy to apply. That gives us a nice little bottle opener made on the Alec anvil from Atlas Knife and Tool. This seems to be a good little anvil. It's way more solid than I would have thought for only being a 66-pound anvil. But that's because all of the face of the anvil is directly over the base. There's nothing hanging out that kind of bounces and vibrates. Even if you can't see that on a bigger anvil, that's often the case as it's not supported. Your most efficient work's always done right over the base. And this entire anvil is pretty much right over the base. So if you're just getting into blacksmithing and you're in the market for your first anvil, this is probably a good choice. And of course, they have lots of other anvils that they are making now. They've got a knife maker's anvil that's essentially the same anvil but without the horn. And they've got some bigger two-horn anvils that they're offering now. So they're really getting a much bigger product line. Not to mention they've got some gas forges, things like that. So Atlas Knife and Tool is certainly a company worth checking out. And I want to thank them for sponsoring today's video. For everybody else, thanks for watching. I hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop, make something, stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video.